Hi, I'm Roy Collin, the host of the podcast. You can find everything about me by scanning the QR code there or going to roycollin.com, and you'll find my 6 podcasts: the Podfather, helping people become podcasters; the Awakening, exposing fraud and corruption but with solutions; the Crypto, all things blockchain technology; meditation podcast; speaking podcast; and the Learn Polish podcast. You can also help the show by actually making a donation, visiting the store, or helping my sponsors. I hope you enjoyed this week's show. Welcome to the Speaking Podcast. You can find all our episodes on speakingpodcast.com. I'm looking forward to this one because I've actually read his book and I was very, very impressed because I've read a lot of speaking books and this kind of tops it. He's a sound communications expert, an author of, I believe, 2 books, but maybe more, we'll see. He's working on another, I know that. International speaker. Now, 5 times TED and 11 times TEDx speaker, viewed over 150 million times, which is mighty impressive. Please welcome Julian Treasure.
Well, nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so, I mean, they're impressive things, but I suppose, I've touched on the bullet points, but you might kind of just introduce yourself and kind of how you got into speaking.
I guess I've been speaking for a very long time. I ran a business. I was an entrepreneur and started a business back in 1988, contract publishing business in the UK, producing lovely customer magazines for brands. And, through doing that, there's a lot of pitching. So that was the start of it, I suppose, standing up in front of people and pitching a room to win business for my agency. Then I became the chair of a thing called the Association of Publishing Agencies, which involved a lot of standing on stages and talking about the industry. So this was all kind of relatively amateur, but, as you know, and as I'm sure others of your guests have said, in the public speaking game, there is no substitute for experience. It's like riding a bike. The first time you do it, it's scary. You may fall off. But after you've ridden it 100 times, it's just riding a bike and you're almost not thinking about it. Well, it's not quite that way with public speaking, but I certainly had a lot of experience of that thing of standing up in front of people with everybody looking at you and needing to put across points in a cogent and persuasive fashion. So that all went on, and then I did some fairly extensive trainings, and that's also something which I think most public speakers would say they've done at some point, either working with a voice coach or a presentation coach. In my case, they were group trainings over multiple days, some of them based around kind of NLP and that kind of thing, others of them based on stage platform skills and so forth. So I took it quite seriously, and I did a lot of training, and that certainly helped to move me to a new level. And so that's the stage I was at when, I think it was back in 2007, I pitched to TED, which I'd been attending for 4 years. I love TED. I think it's a fantastic thing. And I pitched to them the idea of doing a talk about sound. Nobody had ever done a talk with sound on TED. And I got a slot on what was called TED University, which was, their theory was the people in the audience were just as interesting as the people on the stage, which is true because, it's a scary place to speak. You look out from the TED stage, oh, there's Jeff Bezos. Oh, there's Bill Gates. It's not your average audience. So I got a slot to do that, and they liked it. They put it on TED.com. And then I managed to do 4 more in successive years after that. So by the time I did the 5th one, I was pretty experienced of standing on the red dot and looking out at that intimidating audience and delivering something powerful in a very short space of time, which is the trick with TED, really. You're not there for an hour or even half an hour. In fact, some of my TED Talks are sort of 6 minutes or thereabouts. So you need to be pithy, effective, and very focused. And the 5th one, I think I pretty much knocked it out of the park, fortunately. And that's the one that went absolutely ballistic. How to speak so that people want to listen. It's got, 50 million views on TED alone, TED.com alone. And Chris says, whatever it's got on TED, you can double that for embedded, views in people's websites and links and YouTube and all over the place. So that was extraordinary. They didn't put it up for a year, and I thought they didn't like it. Then it went up, and it started going through the roof immediately. So I guess, with speaking, partly it's the subject matter, and partly it's the delivery. Those two things are both extremely important. And this subject matter clearly was something that touched a lot of people. There are a lot of people out there who don't feel heard for one reason or another. And we can go into the reasons why in a minute. I mean, I've got plenty of explanations for that. But it certainly seemed to hit a sweet spot. And interestingly, actually, I'll just say this before I stop rambling.
No, it's very interesting.
The talk on speaking, which was my 5th TED Talk, has 5 times as many views as my talk on listening, which was the 3rd TED Talk. And that to me says something about our priorities and our society in general. We're much more interested in being listened to than listening to others. We're more interested in sending than in receiving. And that's true of businesses just as much as it's true of us as individuals. And I think that's an issue. I think that's something that needs addressing.
Absolutely. And I think in a relationship, I'm just wondering with your wife, if you're not listening properly, does she give you a kick into the head? Because I believe she's a 4 times world champion martial artist.
Yeah, she is that. Well, of course, there is a cross to bear through being a so-called communication, speaking, and listening expert. I won't tell you the number of times I've heard, you are supposed to be an expert on listening in my house. So, none of us are perfect, but it is absolutely true that the most common complaint in relationships is he or she never listens to me. And listening underpins relationships. And, the basis of my work really is that speaking and listening are not unrelated. In fact, they're closely related. It's a circular process. The way I speak affects the way you listen. The way you listen affects the way I speak. And round and round and round. It's organic. It's ever-changing. And if you want to be a great speaker, my proposition is that you really need also to master the skill of listening. And it is a skill, not a capability.
And I think you were talking as well about the difference between hearing and listening.
Definitely. Hearing is a capability. We can all hear. Well, at least not everybody, because there's a lot of people with hearing damage or hearing issues out there. More and more with headphone abuse, which is killing the hearing of many, many young people, unfortunately. That's another thing we need to educate people on. But yes, hearing is a capability. So you hear everything around you, but you don't listen to it all. So listening is a process where you select certain things to pay attention to, and then you make them mean something. And the first and most important part of that is it danger? Because hearing is our primary warning sense. I'm not very good at seeing what's behind me, but I can hear what's behind me. So hearing is the warning sense in all vertebrates. I mean, there's not a vertebrate on this planet that doesn't have ears. There are quite a few that don't have eyes. They live in the dark or wherever. So that part of hearing is really fundamental, and it goes straight to the oldest part of our brain, and we respond to sound far faster than we respond to what we see, orders of magnitude faster. So if there's a sound behind you, it immediately alerts your brain. You'll go into a fight-flight, quite possibly into a fight-flight response. If a car backfires in the street, you'll have a fight-flight response. This is primal. So you'll get a surge of cortisol, noradrenaline, into your bloodstream, ready to do something. By the time your brain says that was a car backfiring, that's all happened. So you can't not do that. So yes, there is a huge difference, because when we're listening, we're interpreting. It's a mental process, and we're making things mean something. So that's my definition of listening, actually, making meaning from sound, which we do all the time. And of course, we all do it differently. So, one of the most important and transformative things that I teach when I'm training people or coaching or doing workshops is that everybody listens uniquely. Your listening, Roy, is unique. So's mine. And they're different because we've come a different road to this conversation here today. We have possibly different values. I mean, they may be similar, but they won't be identical. Attitudes, beliefs. We speak the same language, roughly. But, very often language will be a differentiator. And then the culture that one grows up in, which changes the way we listen and forges it and forms it as we're young. And then in any given situation, we might have intentions, expectations. We might have assumptions about how things work, what goes on, particularly what's going on in somebody else's head. We all do that. And we might have emotions going on. And all of these things change our listening. So, you all have had this experience when you book to do a talk and you stand on a stage. If it's just after lunch, they call that one the graveyard slot. And I get it quite a lot, he's TED speaker, he can deal with that. Thanks a bunch, The listening is very different at that moment for that audience compared to the listening at 9:30 in the morning or at 5 in the afternoon when they all want to go home. So listening changes over time, and it changes from person to person, from group to group. And one of the most powerful things that I teach, which is in my book, so you'll remember this one, is to ask the question, what's the listening I'm speaking into? Because we always speak into a listening. And if we become conscious of that listening, then that's how we can fashion our content and our delivery to be appropriate and hit the bullseye instead of missing the target altogether.
One thing that a lot of people suffer from is, I'm able to listen to everything you're saying, take it in, and then react. A lot of people, their brain is switching on to what they're going to say next, and they're not really listening to you. Is there techniques to stop people doing that? Because I see that constantly. And I know that I was like that before. I mean, it was kind of, or more kind of, as you mentioned, emotions and things like that might be triggered, and you're thinking of something that happened in the past when you're not really paying full attention. Is there techniques that people can do to be fully present?
Well, yes. The first and most important thing is to be conscious that when you're listening, you're doing something, it's work, and it's a skill that you're exercising. So it does take effort. If you're not putting any effort in, you're not really listening. And then you're into that thing of perhaps listening to the voice in your head or wondering what you're going to have for lunch or whatever it might be. It is work. Now, like any kind of skill, you go through stages in the mastery of this. There's the 4 stages, aren't there, of mastering anything. When you go from unconscious incompetence, you don't even know that you don't know it, to conscious incompetence. Oh, there's a thing. So I've now, everybody listening to this, you're now in conscious incompetence. If you're not a master listener already, you now know there's a thing that perhaps you need to master in order to transform your happiness, effectiveness, and well-being, your outcomes in life, because listening is that powerful. So then you practice it and you go into conscious competence. So the great example of this is driving, isn't it? You don't, when you're a child, you don't even know you don't know how to drive. And then you become a teenager and you don't know and you really want to. And then when you become consciously competent, your hands are gripping the steering wheel and your pulse rate is up and you're really focused on it. Well, of course, you then move into unconscious competence when, as we're all driving around now, the last thing we're thinking about is driving, what your foot's doing, what your hand's doing, and so forth. You're thinking about everything else. It's that unconscious. So moving through those stages with speaking takes practice, and with listening takes practice. And listening is just as much of a skill as speaking is. So it might be a bit like hard work to begin with. Really put everything down. Pay attention to the other person. Don't interrupt. And rather than doing that thing that you were just talking about, which I call speech writing, when I'm composing my next brilliant bit of monologue while that noise in front of me is going on, as you speaking, I don't do that. And there's a kind of spiritual aspect to this, which is to trust that when it comes to my turn, I'll say the right thing. It'll come out. because my brain is processing everything that you're saying. My subconscious is dealing with it. And I can simply listen, and then when it's appropriate, when there's a pause, then I trust myself to say the right thing. I don't have to write it like a speech writer or an author and remember it. Now, that's not always doable. If somebody rabbits on for half an hour, then, maybe there are things that you wanted to say and you have to remember them. And it may be polite to interrupt somebody, to say that's really interesting. May I just make a point at this moment? So that you have to create the dance between two people and do that respectfully. But the joy of listening, Scott Peck, I quoted in my book, and I quote him in all my talks. He said, you cannot truly listen to another person and do anything else at the same time. And that, I think, is absolutely true. Now, everybody listening to this, when's the last time you truly, truly listened to another person? Because we're all wrapped up in multitasking. There's always something in our hand. No, I am listening to you. Tap, 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 tap. No, you're sending a text. That's not listening. That's doing something else. So we do a great deal of partial listening, faux listening, doing other things at the same time. And it's a great gift, actually, that we can all give to our nearest and dearest and our friends and colleagues at work, to put everything down and really listen. And you might get the response, what are you doing? Because people are not used to having that going on. We're so used now to talking to the back of somebody's head or the side of their head while they're doing something else. And by the way, just a corollary of this, if you are struggling to be heard and you want to be heard and people aren't listening, I'm a great believer in agreements. And that is to say, Roy, I've got something really important that I'd like to say. Can I have 5 minutes of your undivided attention? Is now good? No? When would be good for you? 4? Perfect. We'll talk at 4, 5 minutes. Now, once we've agreed that, you've made a contract with me. And I think if you start doing text or sending email at 4 o'clock, I have a right to say to you, Roy, you did say, please, you did say you're going to listen to me. So I think that's a very powerful way of making just little windows where you can absolutely make sure, no matter how quiet you are or how interrupty the other person is, you have a contract and you have a right to stand on that.
Excellent. Just with communication, when you're actually listening to, say, a video recording or a podcast, because what I do to kind of get as much information in, like if it's on YouTube, I buy to it. Like in BitChute, it goes up to 4. I can't comprehend it when it's at that level. But even on just an audio, there's times I can go to 3+, and I can understand it. And I'm just wondering, is there any kind of science into, can we still absorb everything, or do we think we are?
Oh, I think there's a huge number of people who are now doubling the speed of podcasts. And in fact, it's an interesting aspect of modern life, is our lack of patience, or the feeling of overwhelm that is on all of us. How many emails do you get a day? I get so many. It's just...
I'm up to 13,000, and each time I've reduced it down, it just goes... And you try to stop looking at it, basically.
Yeah, and you start waking up with it in a cold sweat, thinking, I haven't done, and then there's a list of 100 things. So, life wasn't always like that. It was hard, but, the program was wake up at dawn, plough the fields, do stuff, get tired, eat, go to bed. So, there wasn't this overwhelm feeling that we have now, where we're always on. I wonder how many people listening to this do email in bed. Not a good thing to do. In fact, I remember hearing a long time ago, email was an invention by an evil empire to cripple the productivity of every working person on the planet. Well, to a point, it's doing that. You could summarize the job description of many millions of people in 2 words: answer email. That's what a huge number of people just do all day, reactively. And I think it's very important text-based communication to keep it in its place. And I think it's quite interesting. We've been speaking and listening for perhaps 200,000 years. Complex language, certainly 100,000, but, estimates vary. Could be as long as 200,000. We invented writing, we being humanity, invented writing only 5,000 years ago. So it's incredibly recent, actually, in terms of human history. Writing hasn't existed for the vast majority of human history. But then in that 5,000 years, and particularly in the last 50, it has swamped speaking and listening. And there are many young people now who'd far rather correspond with their friends by text, ask people out, break up with people. You can understand it's arm's length, it's safer, it's asynchronous, you're not necessarily going to get the response immediately. Writing has many great advantages. I'm not denigrating it. Some of the world's greatest social changes have come about because of texts that have been published and disseminated. So writing is a fantastic thing. But I just wonder all the time, and in fact I get outraged all the time by thinking about this, why do we teach reading and writing in school but not speaking and listening? Why? Speaking and listening forge our outcomes in life. You can't do much on your own. If you want to enroll people, if you want to have a team, if you want to lead, if you want to make a difference. So the great leaders in the world have done that by speaking to people, not sending them emails. And so why is it that we don't teach these primal, incredibly powerful skills in school, to the point that most people don't even recognize them as skills? They just think, oh, that's capability. We're expected to pick these things up as we go along and master them. And I'm afraid the vast majority of people haven't even scratched the surface of mastering what their voice can do, how to create persuasive content, how to deliver it in a masterful and persuasive way to each audience, or how to listen to people. And that makes such a difference.
Absolutely. I think with the power of being able to speak, there's also the opposite side of the spectrum. And there was one thing that you wrote and I thought it was interesting, is a speech that the founder of a company, a jewelry company, had made. You might touch on it and the same with Bono as well, you might touch on them things, because I think they're important, because sometimes, people look up to people and they don't realize how important the skill set is.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that was Gerald Ratner, of course, who he now travels the world talking about how to avoid this kind of thing. It was an Institute of Directors meeting in the Royal Albert Hall back in the 80s, and he stood up and attempted to make a humorous speech. So Ratner's was the jeweler of record for the UK. It was on every high street. If you wanted an engagement ring, you'd go down to Ratner's and buy it. It was hugely successful and quite budget. So he went on stage and said, people ask me why our earrings don't last as long as, are so cheap. That's right. He said, people ask me, why is our jewelry so cheap? He said, it's because it's crap. And he said, our earrings won't last as long as a Marks and Spencer's prawn sandwich. So there was a laugh, a sort of slightly uncomfortable laugh, because this is the CEO of a company having a go at his own products. But there were reporters present, and the next day the red tops, the popular tabloids in the UK, smeared it all over their front pages. And people do not like being taken for mugs. They do not like being treated as idiots. So he was basically saying, you're all idiots for buying stuff from Ratner's. There was a massive backlash, and the share price of the company fell to, virtually nothing. He had to resign. They had to refinance, and they relaunched the company with a completely new name. The business was, never the same again. So a few words misplaced can have the most dramatic and positive or negative effects on any business. And that's a case study which has, it terrified CEOs all over the world ever since, really, because you're walking on eggshells a lot of the time with media people who are always looking for the dirt or the outrage, or, there's a world of outrage addiction out there now. We're all addicted to outrage because of something else I talk about in the book. One of the biggest hurdles in effective communication is the desire to be right. And the easiest way to be right is make somebody else wrong. So there's this outrage. Somebody must be to blame. Who's to blame? Let's find somebody in, internet, social media pylons or trolling, or all that stuff is about being right and making somebody else wrong. And with that out there, you have got to be pretty careful now that you don't make a mistake like that and make some sort of huge error that's going to reverberate around the world and wreck your life, your business, your reputation, because reputation is so important now. So yeah, that's one side of it. And you just said, Bono, do you mean about the teleprompter?
Yeah, because like even touching on that, like, we could go with, like if we look at some of the politicians, the ones that speak from the heart tend to resonate a lot better as opposed to the ones that are just reading. And I don't know, people still seem to be cheering them, but they're just reading.
Yeah. Well, I'm not a great fan of reading writing, because I think writing is writing. And if you write a script for a speech and you read it verbatim, well, first of all, you're looking down at a podium the whole time. So you've lost eye contact and that relationship with the audience. And secondly, there's a stiffness. There's a lack of yourself in it. You may have written it from yourself, but that was then. Your current self is standing on stage just pretending to be your former self. And I think there's a sort of stiffness and a gaucheness about that. Unless you're somebody who can do it incredibly well. And yes, there are politicians and other public speakers who've learned how to read from notes. Not Boris Johnson, who, carries a sheaf of mangled up paper on stage with him and leafs through it trying to find the next page. No, professionally, if you're standing and reading and you know it well enough to look up, you can do that. Teleprompters or auto cues, they can be very effective if you know how to do them. And the story I told in the book was of being at TED when Bono spoke, and you can see his TED talk on TED.com. It's a very good talk. Every word of that was read from a teleprompter, which was on a huge screen right at the back of the auditorium, behind the whole audience. But I was sitting quite near the front, and he walked off down a spur in the stage, so I had to turn around, look backwards to see him, and then I could see him reading from the screen. Now, he did it so well that I think anybody who watches that on TED.com wouldn't know that he's reading from an auto cue, from a teleprompter. If you can do it that well, good luck to you. Personally, I'm very much in favour of having cue cards or some aid memoir with you, so you know what your flow is, but you're actually in the moment and talking with the audience and being present, fully present, and generating it in real time. So I think it's a more visceral and connected experience for the audience if you're doing it that way than if you're reading pre-prepared words verbatim.
And like with all the TED and TEDx speeches that you've done, you mentioned your fifth TED was the most successful. Had you different ways of preparing it, and did you kind of improve? What would you because there's a lot of people they're offering courses to people who get on TEDx and everything, and some people worry that they'll forget the words and things like that. Your own process, what was your own process and how it developed over the years when you were doing so many speeches?
Well, I'm a big believer in rehearsal, as any professional speaker would confirm. It's fundamental. When I'm training people on public speaking, or in the book or on my course, I talk about PPD. And it's exactly the same process as that an Olympic athlete would adopt. P, practice. So that's practicing the skill, getting good at the thing. And the thing here is public speaking. So as I said right at the beginning, if you want to become confident and powerful as a public speaker, do it. Just do it. Start with one person, start with 5 people, Go to Toastmasters. I mean, they have a chapter in almost every city or town on the planet, where you can go and speak in front of people who give you feedback and who have the intention of helping you to improve. And that's a positive audience. It doesn't have to be open mic at a comedy club where you get ripped off and heckled. So you can find, form a buddy group, a group of friends who every Wednesday we go around somebody's house and we all deliver a 3-minute talk and give honest feedback. Recording yourself, watching yourself back. It's the most core thing to do. I mean, it's so easy now with phones. Set a phone up, give the talk, and you will watch it back and go, oh my goodness, I never knew I did that. So all of those things, practicing the skill is absolutely fundamental. And then rehearsing the actual talk that you're going to give. Write it, by all means. Start out with it written, and then I would distill it down to bullet points. And once you've really learned it, hopefully it's something you know about anyway. You're not making something up that you've never met before. So it should be coming from your heart, coming from your passion. And once you've got the bullet points, just keep doing it. I mean, I think with my first TED Talk, my daughter, Alice, who was, I think, probably 8 or 9 at the time, she knew it backwards, just as I did, because she was my audience. So I would sit her on the sofa. We're going to do this again with a TV screen behind me, pretending to be the big screen, with slides, which I like to use. Not everybody does. And I did it over and over and over again, to the point where I really knew it. I don't mean I'd learned every word. I mean, I knew what I was doing. I knew what was coming next. And that meant when I went on the stage in front of that scary audience, I could jazz with it. And that, to me, is the joy of public speaking. It's like jazz. It's improvised, but everybody knows what they're doing and where it's going. It's not a mess. So, I mean, I would never walk on a stage and just busk it. That's not my skill. I'm sure there are comedy geniuses who can. Did I write this in the book about Robin Williams? I remember I was at TED once, and things broke. There was a BBC simulcast they'd set up, and the technology broke, and nothing could happen. And there was a guy 3 down from me in the audience who started shouting. I was thinking, typical, but I mean, American, sorry, shouting and making a fuss. And he stood up, and what he was shouting was actually very funny. And it turned out it was Robin Williams, who then went down on stage and did a 10-minute, completely improvised, absolutely brilliant talk. And it was so funny, and he filled the gap. So there are people in the world who can do that. It's not me. If that's you, well done. There are people in the world who can memorize an entire talk. I mean, I remember seeing Alain de Botton's first TED Talk. He's a philosopher, and he just walks on stage, no notes, no keys, guides, slides, props, nothing, just him, and speaks brilliantly for 18 minutes and walks off again. Wow. I can't do that. My memory's not good enough. So you have to work with what you've got. And personally, I like the slides. I don't use bullets. It's just a picture with maybe a single word on it. But it means I know what's coming next. I've always got presenter view on, so I can see the next slide. I never lose my way. I mean, I know the material very well now anyway, most of the time. So I think whatever you're going to use, the key thing is to be confident that you know where it's going to go. By the way, even if you lose your way, and I've seen people do this on the TED stage, people can get very flustered, they stop and there's an awkward silence, and then they go bright red and they start sweating and trembling. And what happens? Well, in TED anyway, the audience start to applaud. They're giving encouragement. Come on, it's all right, we're here. We want to hear what you've got to say. It's a positive listening in that particular audience. And I think most of the time we'd be speaking, the audience is there to hear what we've got to say. They're interested. So that's generally the way it would go down. And it's fine. If it happened to me, if something broke, I would now have the the cool and the aplomb with the experience I've got to say, ladies and gentlemen, I'm terribly sorry. I've completely forgotten what I was going to say next. Give me 2 minutes. I'll be right with you. And then go and get it or find it or whatever I'd have to do. And people will be fine with that. So actually that great terror of losing your way and appearing foolish, it isn't so frightening after all. And that's something to remember, because that's the thing that frightens most people about public speaking, I think.
Like, I know myself, like I was doing most of the stuff I was doing was in Toastmasters, and if somebody didn't turn up or they kind of panicked at the last stage and they said, I can't speak, I just go up and do it. And when there was a slot, I do it. And I mean, at the start, I was preparing a lot, but then it was a case of, yeah, I can wing this. And I was, I formed my own club and I was speaking a lot and everything. And one day I got called out and they said, listen, you're doing great speeches, but we know you can do better because you're not really preparing. We know that you're just making it on the spot. And I kind of took it to heart and I said, okay, next one, all right, I will prepare. And they told me that the next speech was my best speech that I've ever done. And then I was speaking at Mind Valley at an event not long after that, kind of the next speech, it was about 6 months later, and I made sure that I really prepared and I wasn't nervous, right, which I always had a bit of jitters, and it kind of told me, stop winging it, really prepare. And it just makes it so much better, because I mean, when you do record, then you can repurpose it and use it again for something else. But when you're winging it, it's not so that you have as much material that you can be taken from it.
Yes, and it's also respectful of other people's, you're taking up their time. They're sitting there paying you attention. They're giving you, they're listening. And I think it behooves us, when somebody's being that generous, to give them something back. I mean, one of the great secrets of public speaking is it's not about you. And you can tell when it's about the speaker. When they're there, they're looking to get self-aggrandizement. They're looking for approval and love and respect and all that kind of stuff. It's ego-based, and it is transparent. You can tell when somebody's after that. What it's about is the gift that you're giving to the audience, and whatever that gift is, it needs to have some value to them. So, one of the great questions that editors always ask trainee journalists when they're starting is, so what? So what? Why would this matter to the person reading it? It's just the same when you're speaking. So what? Why? If I'm sitting in that audience, why would this be important to me? Is this moving me from where I start to a different place 20 minutes or an hour later or whatever it may be? And what is that place? What's the journey I've been on? Have I learned something? Have I been informed, entertained, impassioned, inspired? There's always a journey that you take people on. Otherwise, it's pointless, What are you doing there if you're not giving them something?
And because I know that you were involved with Toastmasters as well, but I don't know, was it from the book or a TEDx speech or something like that? But I think it's some of it with kind of the judging and the competition. They kind of, a TEDx or not a TEDx, a Toastmaster speaker that has just only done that training, as opposed to, I mean, I've been to a few events, seen different types of training, and I mean, obviously you made it a profession, and you consciously decided you wanted to get the experience that you've done with people kind of that are deciding, hey, I want to actually become a professional speaker. Could you give some of the information that kind of different tuitions would be giving? Because a lot of the times people, they only know Toastmasters.
Oh, totally. I have a lot of respect for Toastmasters, and I think it's a very important organization. I've never done their training. They did give me their Golden Gavel Award a couple of years ago, which was a great honor, and I'm very appreciative of that. There is a tendency for Toastmasters to focus on performance, and that's the way I would put it. So the performance becomes really a little bit artificial. And so, yes, I think you're absolutely right. I think it's crucial to explore all sorts of different trainings. There are people out there who'll sell you a training to get you a TEDx talk. People like Frank King, who, they make a lot of money out of this. And I'm sure they're very good at it, and they'll give you solid advice as long as you're remaining authentic. I talk in the book, and indeed in the TED Talk, I gave this acronym HAIL, the 4 foundations of powerful speaking. Honesty, so being clear and straight in what you say, actually believing it. Authenticity, which is being yourself, and that's crucial. I've seen people who are not naturally speakers be coached to be very other than they really are on the TED stage or in other places. And again, there's a kind of feeling of, it's a bit uncomfortable. This person's acting, pretending it's not who they really are. We don't all have to be dynamic and impactful speakers. We can be quiet and quite reserved. I mean, look at Susan Cain's talk. She's an introvert. She spoke about being an introvert, and she does it in an introverted way. So she doesn't stride on stage and dominate the audience and be loud and demonstrative and gesticulate and so forth. It's not who she is. So I think authenticity is really important. The I of HAIL is integrity, which is to say, being your word. If you say it, you do it, you follow through. And the L, perhaps surprisingly, is love. And that comes back to giving the gift. It's wishing the audience well and seeking to serve them and give them something of value. I think wishing people well is very important. It's the foundation of most religions, if not all religions. The golden rule, loving kindness in Buddhism and agape in Christianity, doing unto others as you would have them do unto you, and so forth. That is the foundation of being a great speaker. Trying to manipulate people, impress them, sell them something. Well, you can do that in a loving way. If you've got something of value that you want to share with people, and you have a business and they understand that, then it's all perfectly authentic and it's loving. High pressure selling, it's not a very listening way to be, I think. And so, there's a balance with all of these things. But I think if you're standing in honesty, authenticity, integrity, and love, you can't go far wrong.
Because I've listened to a few of your TED speeches, and one you were playing all the songs in the the background, which was kind of confidence in yourself to actually do that, and it was very interesting as well, because to get your message across, rather than just say it, you had these kind of noises in the background, so people could actually relate to it a lot better. But there was one of the things as well that you touched in the book, and I'm just kind of touching on this noise and how important it is. And it's something that I've been talking a lot about, like in hospitals, because you mentioned about like the alarms going off. And the one thing in health that makes you better is sleep. And in hospitals, as you mentioned in the thing, like the alarm going off every hour or waking you up early. And I mean, that's just a point that I'm saying, but with the kind of noise, because you touched on as well, like if we were in a bar, there's a kind of technique, rather than me roaring, which I have done, and I didn't realize there was this technique, and that you'd have a sore throat the next day, and you just kind of think that's what it is. You might let people know you don't have to be screaming.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing, actually. It was taught to me a long time ago. If you're in a very, very noisy place, it could be a bar, a gig, whatever it is, rather than going an inch away from somebody's ear and shouting, which can actually damage their hearing. That's very loud, a human voice at that range. All you have to do is tell them to press the little flap of skin on the outside of their pinna, their ear. That's the pinna, the funny shaped flap of skin on the side of our head is called a pinna. And there's this little flap that you can close if you press on it. And if somebody presses on that, and then you speak at a perfectly normal volume next to their ear, they'll hear you. It's an amazing thing, but it's true. I don't know quite how it works. I guess it stops the rest of the noise, and maybe the vibration from your voice is going through some sort of conduction through the skin as well. Who knows? But it does work, and it's rather lovely. So we don't have to shout. And yes, noise is a huge, huge, huge problem. Well, that's my new book, which is coming out spring next year. It's going to be called Sound Effects, and it's all about our relationship with sound. Because the sound agency, which is that company I've been running for 20 years, is an audio branding company, and a lot of the work that we do is removing noise from public spaces like malls and shops and other spaces like that, and designing better sound. And in fact, we spawned a business called Mood Sonic, which is doing fantastic things now around the world in installing beautiful nature-based soundscapes in offices to improve people's health, because offices are stressful now. You can't hear yourself think in many of them, and you're trying to write or do work or think, and that creates a stress reaction. People get tired, and cortisol, noradrenaline, people get sick. So open plan offices, they may be okay for collaboration, although the jury's out even on that one, but then very, very poor for concentration or for solo working. And Mood Sonic is helping that with nature-based soundscapes that tend to blur other people's conversation and make it easier to concentrate. And the science now shows that gentle water, gentle birdsong, gentle wind, these nature-based sounds are very good for us. We've evolved to them over hundreds of thousands of years, in millions of years. And they've all been around a lot longer than we have. Birds have been here for many, many hundreds of millions of years. So those sounds are natural, and they're great sounds to work to, by the way. If you're in a noisy place and you want to put headphones on and concentrate, then nature sound is very good for doing that, because you can not pay attention to it. Whereas if you're listening to music, music's whole intention is to be listened to, and it's very hard. You're replacing one distraction, which is other people's conversation, with a much more pleasant distraction, which is music. So your productivity won't be any better. You'll have more fun. It's certainly true, but you won't work faster.
And I'm just curious, because recently I heard that the sound coming from a Bluetooth speaker ain't as good, not quality wise, no, but for, I don't know, the frequency and the health benefits, as opposed to timber speakers with the vibrations and everything. And I was kind of,
Never heard that one.
Yeah.
What, because it's coming from plastic or something like that?
Possibly, or the one area, I'm not sure, but I heard that the wooden speakers with the vibrations is a lot healthier for us.
Well, that's an interesting one. I'll have to investigate that. I mean, and there's a lot of debate around sound generally. And I think I wrote in my previous book, Sound Business, more about sound in the scientific sense. And, for example, the whole thing of concert A is 440 hertz, whereas a lot of people would say, no, adjust that because it's not one of the natural harmonics. And the natural harmonic scale is something which exists in the universe generally. Absolutely true. So the well-tempered scale is a little bit artificial. Well, we've now got keyboards that you can put into any mode that you like, any scale that you like, including the natural harmonic scale. So there are all sorts of bits of music being made by people in those scales. I can't tell that they make me feel better, but hey, it's like that ADSR thing, great, or binaural beats. There's all sorts of the stuff here which is not really proven, but if it works for you, great. I just would say with binaural beats, don't expect to become a Buddhist monk in half an hour, because that really isn't going to happen. You may find it feels better, in which case, excellent. It's up to you. I mean, there are some lovely purveyors of sound. I mean, I would recommend to anybody listening to this, mynoise.net. I have no financial interest in that at all, but Stéphane Pigeon, who runs it, is a lovely man, and it's a beautiful site if you want to have some background sound just in your home through your computer, and it does all sorts of wonderful things. So that's worth checking out. And you could listen to that kind of stuff on headphones and work very, very well indeed. So, I have no doubt there's a lot we're going to discover about sound, just in the same way that most of the medicines that we have now were derived from herbal origins, and the people who were using those for centuries got burned at the stake or murdered for being witches or whatever. And now we realize, oh, actually, there are chemicals in those things that do achieve these outcomes, and we put them into pills. So now they're mainstream medicine. I think it's very likely that we will discover that sound does have effects on our bodies. I mean, we're 70% water or something like that, and sound conducts very well through water. Every part of us is vibrating all the time, from the atoms, even the subatomic particles, to the molecules and cells that make up our body. It's all vibrating. So vibration is life, really, in the universe. No vibration, that's nothingness, that's death. And so I would be surprised if external vibrations don't have an effect on our vibrations in some way, shape or form. And that's a whole area that science hasn't really explored in full yet. And I'm sure we will discover that there are healthy sounds and unhealthy sounds. And I also expect that a lot of the sounds that we make these days are not very good for us. So I think it's very important to start listening and, taking responsibility, curating the sound around you in your home. Go into every room, close your eyes, and ask yourself, is this the most healthy and productive sound I could have in this room? And that's an important investigation for everybody. Well, there are something like 8 million people in Europe whose sleep is being wrecked night after night by traffic noise that's way above the World Health Organization recommended maximum. So noise is just behind air pollution as a killer in the world now. And it's depriving millions of people of life or life expectancy, because we now know that noise is associated with heart attack, stroke, and all sorts of other illnesses, not to mention, emotional and psychological damage. So noise is a big problem. Sadly, not a political problem. You don't get many politicians going, vote for me, I'll make it quieter. Doesn't happen.
Just on the binaural beats, I was learning languages with that, and I was able to retain it a lot better, but unfortunately they didn't have different levels. So it was I reached the peak, so I wish they had that more advanced levels to see how I could improve. But so I know for me, that it worked. And you mentioned your book, you said spring of next year. Did you mean this year?
No, it's not coming out until spring 25.
Oh, okay.
We're working on the final draft through to April, and then it's off to the publishers, and that's how long it takes to get a book out these days. So spring 25, it'll be out.
Okay. And just finally, because I believe that your audio, I don't know, was it of the How to Be Heard book, but one of your books was done very well. You might just touch on that.
Yes, well, that was lovely, actually. How to Be Heard. We recorded the audiobook version of that. I mean, I did it myself, and we recorded it in a tiny studio just up the hill here in Kirkwall in Orkney, which is normally full of people with barons and fiddles. But we decked it out for a voice, and I was in there for a couple of weeks. And so we recorded it in a very cottage industry way, and it won both of the world's two leading audiobook awards for Best Business Book of its year, the SOVAS Award and the Audie, which was thrilling, actually. I mean, that was really nice to know. So it's certainly been a popular audiobook. And yes, I think that, a lot of what we've talked about today is in that book. So it's available at, all the usual outlets. And of course, if people want to pop by, if it's business sound, then the sound agency does that. And if it's speaking and listening or personal sound, then I'm at juliantreasure.com, and there's some free stuff on there. And I'd be delighted to hear from anybody.
Yeah, and for those watching on Spotify, Rumble, BitChute, or YouTube, you can actually see both of them websites. But if you're just listening on the audio, I'll include both the show notes for all the different platforms it's on. So I just will say it again. There's the book. I give it 10 out of 10. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's got fantastic information. Anybody that aspires to be a better speaker, you've got gold in it. So for the price of a book, with all the cost of training and different things around the world, it's incredible value. So I just say congratulations on that, and I look forward to your next book. And thank you very much for being a guest on the show.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you very much, Roy.
That's all for the Speaking Podcast. You'll find all our episodes on speakingpodcast.com. Until next week, take care. So I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. As mentioned at the start, you can find my 6 podcasts on roycollin.com or scan the QR code if you're looking to start a podcast or do a podcasting tour, help with that. Also, if you're looking for a virtual assistant, we also have that service. And you can help the show by visiting the store, supporting our sponsors, or making a donation. Until next week, take care.